An ordinary man can reach extraordinary heights. What makes the difference is not innate talent but in habits of thinking that are nurtured every day. Burger and Michael Starbird's fifth book, Elements of Effective Thinking, doesn't promise magic secrets, but opens a simple but sustainable system of methods: understanding deeply, learning from mistakes, asking questions, watching the flow of ideas, and changing yourself. These 5 elements, when made into habits, not only help us learn better but also reshape the way we see the world and ourselves. The question is, if change is the essence and all progress comes from small shifts in thinking, how far can we, seemingly ordinary people, become better versions of ourselves? And before going into the summary, we encourage listeners to buy and read the book to fully experience its content. Because only when you read the whole book will you understand the issues I am talking about. Please buy the book and support the author. Now let me start summarizing this book. Part 1. The Foundation for Thinking. Understand deeply. Silas sat in class, eyes wide as the teacher returned the test. The red number 58% is like a knife in the heart. He doesn't understand why he failed. I know everything, just a few small mistakes. Silas muttered, confident that his preparations were sufficient, but that confidence was only a thin layer of paint, hiding a rotten foundation. He memorized, cramming in bits and pieces of information without understanding it deeply. You think you have it down, but you're really just holding on to bits of color, with no main axis to connect to. And then when the new variant comes out, it all falls apart. Understanding the simple is the first building block of solid thinking. When we touch the root, the simple things suddenly appear with a completely different weight. An example comes from a music lesson, where chomp master Tony Block listens to young students perform technical pieces. They play well, fast, tall, full of confidence. But then he returned to a basic exercise that any beginner knows: a few simple notes. The sounds that came out were nothing remarkable. Then the plong lifted his trumpet and blew those exact notes and the room fell silent. Each sound, though simple, resonates as if it has a soul. Subtlety in every vibration. The way he creates music from what everyone considers childish. Expose the difference between a true teacher and a mere technical master. That is the core. If you want to reach the sublime, you must start by contemplating seemingly small things, learning math. Go back to algebra, learn to write. Take short sentences and learn to draw. Look at a simple line. People often think of going back to basics as a step back. Actually, that is the only way to go. Because when we master the simple, we can build a solid framework for the complex layers later. That is why geniuses like Newton or Einstein do not come from grand mysteries but from looking at the familiar with unusual eyes. A little exercise can clarify this. Please sit down. Write a list of the core concepts of your field of interest. Don't worry about it being lacking or messy. Just list and pick one and spend 30 minutes digging into it. Ask again and again, interpret, test. You will be surprised to see a solid foundation gradually emerge. From there you can climb higher, further. Simplicity is the gateway to profundity, as in playing the guitar. If you just press the right keys without feeling each note, you will never reach the depth of the music. If you study history only by memorizing the names of presidents and generals, you will miss the movement of ideas, of society, of value conflicts. If you do politics by clinging to slogans and candidates' appearances, you have lost the essence of the decision. That principle is not just in the classroom, it is present in every choice. In daily work, when we focus on the root and the trunk, the branches and leaves have a chance to grow. Silas failed because he considered memorization to be enough. But when you start practicing simplicity with rigor and patience, you will realize one truth. It is the familiar that hides many unexplored layers. Every time you come back to it, you dig a little deeper, discover another vein, and go deeper. The more solid your foundation is, the more it opens up infinite doors for thinking. That's where our journey begins. Go back to the first bricks, sharpen the labels, place them firmly, and then build from there. Recall the image of Newton sitting under an apple tree during the pandemic that forced Cambridge University to close. The falling apple not only aroused curiosity but also gave rise to a whole system of theories that mankind still uses today when watching an apple fall. Newton did not stop at noting that the ball fell to the ground. He went further. Why does it fall? How fast does it fall? If we know the speed at each moment, can we calculate the distance it travels? These questions lead to the notion of derivatives and integrals, the foundation of differential calculus. And from that very ordinary movement, humans paved the way for space science, computers, and modern technology. This reminds us that greatness arises from the deepening of the ordinary. If you only stop at surface observation, you will have only fragmentary truths. If you look deeply, you will find hidden structure and meaning. Newton did not aim directly at deciphering the universe. He started with an apple. Moving into the 20th century, John Kennedy declared in 1961 that within this decade America would land a man on the moon and return him safely the next day. NASA did not immediately rush into finding a way to land softly. They chose another target. Let's smash a drone ship into the moon. Ranger 7 slammed into the surface at nearly 6,000 miles per hour. From that impact, they extracted data, gradually refined the process, 15 tests, and repeated them until Apollo 11 stepped on the moon in 1969. That was the motto. When faced with an impossible problem, break it into a possible one. Instead of circling around the unsolvable, pick a small, accessible slice. Think it through and then expand from there. Connect the pieces to form the whole. Suggested exercises for you. Try writing down what you think you know. For example, if you are interested in economics, open a blank page and list the fundamental principles that you believe you understand. Supply and demand, balance, maximum profit. Free market. After writing, compare with the book, with real data, you will realize the red hole. Maybe you only know the name supply and demand balance but do not understand the horizontal axis. What does the vertical of the chart mean? It is those pink holes that you need to dig deep. And when you fill in, you don't just gain a piece of knowledge, you're building a complete map of that field. From here we move to another aspect, removing the confusion to find the essence. Imagine birds flying for ages. People think of flying as flapping wings, but the essence of flying lies in the delicate curve of the wing. The air flow is faster on the top surface. Create lift. The loud sound of flapping wings is just the manifestation, not the essence. Or in the game Find Watto. You look at the messy picture full of characters, dizzy looking for the boy in the red striped shirt. If you clear the crowd of spectators, Wando will appear immediately. The difficulty does not come from the wand itself, but from the chaos surrounding it. In art, Picasso painted a series of throwaway paintings. From the initial detailed drawing, he gradually removed each layer, removing muscles, removing shadows, removing flesh details. After 18 steps, there are only a few curves and a few squares left. But it is this simplification that reveals the bull's form in its purest form, its core strength. It is our nature to be so fascinated by the noise and complexity that we forget the still center that is waiting for us to recognize. The method here is very clear. Find and eliminate each distraction, focus on the core that remains, and then project the whole picture from there. Try doing an exercise, pick a problem that confuses you. For example, raising children. Instead of getting overwhelmed by the plethora of advice, identify one core goal. For example, I want my child to become independent and responsible. Just those dozen will guide you in every choice. Should I do my homework? Should we intervene when our children fail? Every decision becomes clearer when you stick to your core goal. That is the power of stripping away clutter to find the essential. Like a bird flying by the curve of its wings. As Wayno emerges from the crowd like Picasso's bull appearing through a few simple strokes. When we learn to see through the noise, our true nature is revealed. Guide every thought and action. Picasso did not just paint a cow. He undertakes a journey of dissection starting from a meticulous drawing with full details of muscles, shadows, and skin thickness. He repeated the process 18 times. Each time he removed a layer, muscles disappeared, lines became flatter, shadows disappeared, and three-dimensionality dissolved. By the end of the table only a few curves and some overlays remained. But it is this ultimate simplification that makes the viewer realize the essence, strength, and density of the cow. Just the core and that's all. People often fear that simplification will lose the truth. But properly simplified reality reveals the essential. Life is filled with details, with noise, with surfaces that distract us. Without the courage to let go, we will never see what defines the whole. So when faced with a problem, try asking, what would be the thing to keep if all the accessories disappeared? Try a little experiment, pick a topic, write down a bunch of elements around it, and then eliminate them. Eliminate the peripheral elements, and finally keep the one thing that you believe, without which the whole meaning collapses. That is the backbone you need to hold on to. Once we have learned to filter, we move on to the next challenge, seeing what is there. It sounds simple, but the truth is we constantly fool ourselves. An art professor once said, "Shadows outside are not gray, they are the color of the sky." It sounds absurd, but if you look closely, you will see that shadows on the ground reflect a faint purple, blue light, not black. After years of looking at shadows, we believe they are gray, when they have never been gray. In a medieval art class, a student was asked to describe a painting. He tried to find the beautiful words, yes, or halo, to symbolize the circle of life. The professor just coldly replied, "Don't talk nonsense, say what you really see." Another painting showed a monk standing with his back to the blue sea and the vast sky. When the teacher asked what they saw, the whole class was confused and searched for the hidden meaning. Finally, the teacher exclaimed, "This is a monk, with his back to the sea and the sky." The obvious is obscured by our own minds. Because we stubbornly believe that there must be something deeper hidden. This habit is deeply ingrained in knowledge. Aristotle once asserted that heavy objects fall faster than light objects. Thousands of years later, people still believe it. Why? Because it sounds reasonable and because Aristotle said so. Galileo, through simple experiments, proved that in a vacuum all objects fall at the same speed, regardless of mass. What we think we see is not what is there. We often see with our ears, with the prestige of others, not with our eyes. One way to practice is to write it down. I know this, I don't know that. No embellishment, no concealment, only when we acknowledge the blank space can we begin to fill it. Likewise, in writing, rereading your own text as if it were unfamiliar, we will discover looseness, ambiguity, and misrhythm. If we only read with the mind of the writer, we will ignore those blank spaces. Once we have seen the obvious, we can go one step further, finding the absence, not only looking at the object but also looking at the space around the object. Artists call it negative space. A clear example before the Second World War happened. The War of 1914 to 1918 was called the Great War or the War to End All Wars. Only after the Second World War broke out did people go back to calling it the First World War. If people had given it the number 1 in 1918, the world might have prepared a different mindset. The way of naming reveals what is missing. Once a grocery store owner realized the limitation, customers could only buy what they could carry. He tried adding a detail. Wheels attached to the wooden chair frame, added a basket. And so the supermarket trolley was born. Great ideas do not come from excess but from seeing the limitation that is binding. You can try it yourself. Take a familiar concept and add an adjective to make it strange. For example, instead of education, call it depersonalized education. Immediately you see the gap of how to teach more personalized. It is the lack that opens up potential. In science, Niels Sportby once tried a mind game to understand quantum mechanics, a counterintuitive theory. One day, he assumed it was true and followed the consequences. The next day, he assumed it was false and watched how the world worked. The results not only helped him accept the correctness of the theory, but also gave him a broader perspective, accepting false assumptions to understand what was true. It is also a way of looking at what is missing. When we focus on what is not there, what is overlooked, we have the opportunity to pave the way. The truth does not always lie in the obvious. Sometimes it is hidden in the gaps that we do not think of. When we learn to look directly at what is there and what is missing, a core principle appears. If you cannot explain it, it means you do not know it. Students often say, "I understand. I just cannot express it." The truth is the opposite. When you cannot tell others, it is a sign that you have not mastered it. Deep understanding means the ability to express clearly, be verifiable, reflect on new situations without wavering. The habit of deep understanding helps us set new standards. It's not whether I know or not, but how much I know, what gaps I have. Each time you return to the foundation, you will find them both simpler and more sophisticated. Like the trumpeter, he played an elementary exercise but turned it into music like Newton. He watched an apple fall and pulled out a cosmic law like Galileo. He dared to doubt the truth to be reminded again and again for thousands of years. Remember that most dangerous mistakes come not from what we don't know but from what we are sure we know but are actually wrong. Aristotle said that heavy objects fall faster than light objects. And all of Europe believed that for 2 millennia. The trap here is authority and repetition. If we rely only on prestige or familiarity, we will be imprisoned in illusion. The remedy is the question. What evidence do I have to know this? If the answer is just someone saying so, then the foundation not yet stable. The final challenge in this section is to see your own limitations. Practice making opposing assumptions. For example, you have strong political beliefs for an hour. Try looking at the world from the opposite side. Trace the consequences as if it were true. You don't necessarily change your views, but you will understand better why others think differently and why your views may or may not need to be revised. It is a way of looking into the gaps in your own thinking. When you put it all together, understand the simple, the profound, remove the confusion to reveal the essence, see the obvious, look at the absence. You stand on solid ground. Earth is the symbol of this section. It gives us support, a launching pad. From that ground, all other thinking can grow, stabilize and reach far. Try an image. You hold a magnifying glass and then a microscope to a familiar object like a leaf, a drop of water. Suddenly, a whole new world appears. Hidden structures that the naked eye cannot see. Deep understanding is like that. You don't go looking for something strange far away, you look back at the familiar. But with the magnification of intelligence, each time you magnify, a new layer of meaning appears that is familiar. What you touch every day contains an untapped treasure. You just need to look more closely, be more patient, more honest when you have that habit. You enter any field with a different confidence. You know how to find the foundation, build a frame and from there create something new as deeply as possible. Shallow understanding is fragile, deep understanding paves the way. Shallow understanding is like standing on sand, deep understanding is standing on rock. What foundation do you want to build your house of knowledge or career on? The answer will decide everything. Part 2, Fire. Lighting up knowledge through mistakes, failure to success. Everyone is afraid of that word, failure. It sounds like a sentence, like the end of school, bad grades turn into shame at work. Mistakes are considered proof of incompetence. Society builds a wall thickness pushes us away from falls. But if we look deeper, we will see a paradox. It is mistakes that are the fuel for creativity. To come up with new ideas, to move forward. We need fire. And the fire here is lit from mistakes. The story begins with a small company that few people remember the name Chapo. 3 young men in their 19s and 20s were eager to bring their intelligence to the market. They built a traffic data analysis system, hoping to turn information into profit, but the product did not sell. The company died young. If they stopped there, they would only be remembered as immature entrepreneurs. But 2 of them, Alan and Bill Gates, carried those scars and continued from the ashes of Chapo data. They learned about programming, about operations, about the limits of technology. A few years later, those lessons became the foundation of Microsoft. If there had been no first fall in life, there would have been no software empire. The lesson is clear: mistakes do not erase you, they recreate you. Shape you. We are taught to avoid errors at all costs, when what we need to learn is to exploit them. Errors are not obstacles, but maps that show which paths don't work. Try a different frame of mind. Imagine that to solve a problem, you failed 9 times and only succeeded on the 10th. If you knew this in advance, would each failure still be a disaster or simply a step in the journey, a rung on a 10-step ladder, the 10 times exercise? It frees you from the fear of failure, turning each failure into progress. You can try it right now. Pick a difficult problem, write a script, solve a math problem, design a product, set a goal. I will fail 9 times, each time I fail. Record specifically where I failed, why I failed. The act of analysis is the key. Because when you just say I failed, you don't learn anything. But when you say I failed because this assumption was wrong, you just made progress. 1 step: next time you eliminate the bad, you try the same 9 times, you've cleared the minefield and success comes at step 10. We are often blinded by the fear of being judged. To be wrong means to lose face. But the truth is the only person who doesn't make mistakes is the one who never tries, and not trying means no progress. If you want a new idea, you have to embrace the fire of mistakes. When you sit in front of a blank page, not writing because you're afraid to write now, you've failed in the worst way. You've failed because you didn't start. If instead you write anything, even if it's wrong, you have something to edit. The bad leads to the good. The good leads to the good. Shakespeare was writing messes before Hamlet. FDR crossed out lines in his speeches before Adept with infamy. No one goes straight from blank to masterpiece. Mistakes are an integral part of the creative process. Without them, we have no direction. Without them, we just stomp your feet. The lesson from Chapo is not about a company disappearing, but about an empire conceived and left to die. The lesson from F and Times is not about numbers, but about perspective. Every mistake is a step, not a fall. So dare to step into the fire. Because only when tested by fire, metal becomes strong. And only when you dare to be wrong, you dare to be right. Mary is an art student. She loves painting, music, anything intuitive. But the curriculum forced her to sign up for modern mathematics. From the beginning, Mary was discouraged. The unfamiliar symbols, the dry definitions like a language from another planet. When the teacher asked who would volunteer to explain the concept of infinity, the whole class was silent. Mary was called on, her heart pounding, her palms sweating. She thought she didn't know, that she would only be laughed at, but she stood up anyway. Mary's answer was wrong, but instead of laughing at her, the teacher asked, "Do you see anything in what you said, okay?" She hesitated, then pointed to a pink hole. The second time, she tried again, still wrong but closer. Each loop, Mary learns one thing, with no completely wrong answer. Only progress is hidden by error. A few rounds later, she gave the correct solution, even different from the textbook, creative and convincing. That's the power of the guess, error, and fix process. Every mistake is not a hole but a mark on the map. No one solves a difficult problem in one go. People go from wrong to almost right to right. Mary didn't just learn math, she learned how to think, using errors as tools. We often think of creativity as a flash of lightning, a moment of explosion. But creative practice is like carving stone. The first cut you make is wrong, the second cut is wrong. Each wrong stroke helps you see the image clearly in the stone. And finally, the statue appears similarly in literature and art. CP did not write Hamlet in one go. Before he had his immortal lines, he had to write a series of drafts full of errors and nonsense. They paved the way for the final version. The Michelangelo sculpture says, "I saw the angel in the stone and I released it," but he didn't do it in one stroke. He made hundreds of mistakes, thousands of corrections. A bad draft is the gateway to a good draft. But we often blind ourselves with fear of writing badly, doing badly, speaking badly. When you're afraid, you stand still. When you stand still, you have nothing to fix. Mary has proven that it's better to make mistakes many times than not to try at all. When doing something difficult, don't aim to get it right away. Aim to make a mistake and write it down. What was the mistake? Why did it happen? From there, you have a path to correct. The mistake becomes a guide, and you move forward and look back. We see that there are two types of mistakes: accidental mistakes like Mary's. You accidentally make a mistake, but it is that mistake that reveals a path. Answering the wrong question correctly, you get lost. But from that loss, you realize the original question was not correct and you find the real question. Each type of mistake contains a seeds of progress. Without mistakes, there would never be seeds. When you step out of the classroom, that lesson is still true in your work, when writing reports, when giving presentations, when planning projects. Mistakes are inevitable. The difference is whether you deny them or exploit them. Mary chose to exploit them, and she turned a terrifying experience into a creative moment. We can too. A playwright like Shakespeare did not jump straight to immortal lines. Before to be. On to be, he had to sketch out a series of drafts, experimenting with awkward sentences, lengthy dialogues, each flawed draft becoming the soil in which the germ of an idea emerged. The bad draft is not a waste but the soil that nurtures the good draft. Modern history is also clear. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked President Frinde. Roosevelt drafted a speech to deliver to the National Assembly in the first draft. The opening sentence reads, "ADEP will live in world history." This sentence sounds smooth but lacks power. Russ corrected "will lie infamy" with just one word, but it transformed the whole nuance of infamy. Shame, guilt touched the heart of the American people, engraved in the collective memory. To get that sentence he had to cross out "try again" wrong and correct the right sentence was born from a series of wrong sentences. This is the pattern in all creative fields that emerges through a series of failures. There is no SASP, no broken drafts. There is no Russman, no discarded lackluster speeches. There is no Michelangelo, no thousands of misdirected chisels. What we see is only the end result, the play, the speech, the statue. But behind is a huge graveyard of mistakes, and it is that graveyard that makes the masterpiece. Even in scientific thinking, many advances come from answering the wrong question correctly. A researcher may find a brilliant solution to a problem only to realize that the problem is not important. But thanks to that, they identify a new question, or rather, deeper. Mistakes redirect attention, open up paths that no one has seen. So when you are in a state of not knowing where to start, the advice is not to sit in front of a blank page, writing anything, clumsy ideas. Silly sentences, half-baked plans, all are better than nothing. Because from that pile of words, you have something to cross out, to rearrange, to find errors. A bad text can turn into a good one, but a blank page is just a blank space. Try when preparing a speech, instead of waiting for perfect inspiration, write down the first lines, accept the good and the bad, then read it again, find errors, and edit. The feeling of failure is no longer a failure but a starting step. Shakespeare once left black ink marks crossing out the whole page. Rusvel once corrected every word in that manuscript as proof. Good things are not born from blank spaces but from the density of errors. If you consider mistakes as your enemy, you will be exhausted. If you consider them as your guide, you will go far. Mary learned it in math class. Shakespeare and Roosevelt demonstrated it in art and politics. You can practice it every day, too, writing an email, drafting a plan, doing a calculation, making a mistake, then listening to what it says. Mistakes are not silent, they speak. This direction is deadlocked, that assumption is wrong. This sentence lacks power. If you have the courage to listen, the mistake will show you the way. There are days when everything goes right, you calculate carefully. But the project fails. You prepare a presentation but edit it incorrectly. The audience is silent. We call it a bad day, and the natural reflex is to erase it. Forget it. But if we listen, a bad day is also a lesson. Have a BA day, turn it into a laboratory. After a day like that is over, write down what went wrong and what it taught me. It is in the ashes that you pick up the embers that can burn bright next time. Another method, magnification to expose flaws. Suppose you have a hypothesis but the weak points are not obvious. Take it to the extreme. Imagine it expanded 100-fold, 1,000-fold. Then the flaws become obvious. If your argument says everyone should do good, imagine the whole world doing good. What happens? From the magnified situation, you see structural cracks that were not visible at the small scale. And when you see them at the extreme, you go back and check the original version. Often the flaws were there all along, we just weren't sharp enough to notice them. Sometimes mistakes need to be made on purpose. Deliberately try a solution that you suspect is wrong. Why? Because you're not sure which way is right. If you just play around in your comfort zone, you'll stay in the same loop. A single failed attempt can reveal a new path, like a scientist testing a hypothesis he knows won't hold. But when it collapses, he sees a crack that leads to another thread of ideas. All of these methods require a radical change in mindset, a new frame of reference for failure, no longer seeing it as humiliating, no longer avoiding it, but seeing it as a sign that you are thinking, making progress if you have never failed. That means you have never tried anything outside of your familiar territory. And if you fail, you are entering new territory. Remember the image of fire. Fire both destroys and refines. Metal becomes hard through fire, ideas become bright through fire. If we want to think effectively, we must accept the fire of failure. Not to be burned but to be reshaped. Try setting yourself a challenge, choose something you are afraid of failing at, then do it deliberately, record the error, dissect, learn and repeat. You will see the fear decrease, and the ability to adapt increase. Each mistake becomes a stepping stone. The key point is this: don't stand still. Standing still is the real failure. But if you dare to fail, it means you are going. And when you go, the fire lights the way. Even if at first it is only small embers, which will eventually become a burning light. Third, the air that creates questions from nothing becomes its own stress. CR once said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." He was not famous for giving answers but for the way he kept asking questions. Forcing people to face the contradiction in their own words is a question, not an answer. New is the tool that cuts through the layers of sophistry. And we too can become our own Socrates. By getting into the habit of creating questions out of thin air, we often treat the answer as an end point. When someone asks, we answer, and that's it. But in fact, every answer should only be the beginning of a new question, like a seed sprouting. The sprout branches out again. A good answer does not close the investigation but opens a network of other questions. Remember Mary in the previous story. The art student found a unique solution to infinity in mathematics. But it wasn't the first answer that drove her. It was her wondering if this solution was correct and if there was another way to express it that took her further. New questions arise from incorrect answers that become steps. The answer leads to the question. It is a spiral that keeps thinking going. If you are satisfied with the answer only, you are like the person who stops at the gate without entering the house. Each answer can become a ticket to open a new journey. If you are curious enough to ask "So what? What does this entail?" Try a little exercise. Whenever you have an answer, don't consider it finished. Please write at least one question that arises from it. For example, you know that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. The next question might be, why does water boil at a lower temperature in high mountains? This question leads you to atmospheric pressure, to physical structure. The answer opens up a new layer of questions and so on endlessly. Good questions focus attention on the right issue. Sometimes it's not what we answer that matters, but what we ask next. So there is no need to give a complete theory. He just asked if you were sure. If so, what follows? And what if it isn't? This series of questions makes others self-reflect, revealing parts they have not thought of. Asking questions is like turning on a light in a dark room. One light is not enough to shine all the light. But as you continue to turn on, each new angle appears. The answer is just a light. The new question is which switch turns on the extra light. Look around your everyday life when you think you're done. That's when it's time to ask one more question. If you solve a problem, ask if there is a shorter way to solve it. If you complete a project, ask, are there any assumptions here that have not been challenged? If you finish a book, ask what the author left unsaid and what you would like to ask more. When you turn answers into questions, you not only dig deeper into an area, you also develop a habit of never letting your thinking go dormant. And it is this habit that makes the mind alert, flexible, and ready to reach for new things. Each question is like a spark, you touch it, your mind lights up. Questions pique curiosity in a way that answers never can. An answer can frame the matter. And questions open doors, leading us further, to unknown lands. Imagine a classroom where the teacher only cared about the answers students calculated. Finished work. Curiosity died there. But what if instead of asking for the correct number, the teacher asked again, why is that? If we change the assumption, will the result still be correct? If it is true, what are the consequences? If it goes wrong, what do we learn? At that time the student's mind will be forced to move. Questions turn curiosity into motivation, pulling people beyond their comfort zone. Asking questions has another power. It exposes the hidden assumptions in every statement. There are always things we take for granted. When we ask, we bring those assumptions to light. For example, when saying this person is successful by luck, the reasonable question is, how do we define luck? What other factors contribute? It is that question that forces us to disassemble the argument and see its shortcomings. Questions also help us avoid bias. If we only affirm, we easily fall into the trap of blind confidence. But what if we look from another angle? We create room for humility, for the ability to learn. Try to make it a habit that after every answer you give in class, in meetings, in everyday life, immediately write down a question that arises. It may feel forced at first, but gradually you will find your mind getting used to it. An answer is no longer a full stop but a comma. This practice turns learning into a continuous flow. You never stop because new questions always arise. Curiosity is no longer a fleeting emotion. It becomes a structure, a self-sustaining mechanism. You learn to ask to learn, and that loop creates momentum. The cool thing is that even if you don't have the answer to the new question, you've made progress. Because asking a question means you have seen a pink hole, a bright crack, and that bright crack suggests something to you or to others. A direction so never gave all the answers, but his questions paved the way for all of Western philosophy. Questions that clear the mind. A good question can keep you thinking about it for days or weeks, and that thinking is proof that you're digging deep. Meanwhile, an easy answer makes you sleep soundly. So do you choose sleep or restlessness? We often get stuck not because of lack of answers but because of asking the wrong questions. All the effort, all the debate, all the resources can be thrown down the drain just because we focus on a fake question. Let's look at an example in education. There was a time when people often asked why black students were bad at math, which sounded like a straightforward question but was actually flawed in its structure. It draws attention to race. One variable does not explain the nature of the problem, the outcome. Any subsequent replies are lost. Which is innate, which is environment. Whereas the right question should be what factors in teaching, resources, motivation, sense of belonging, history of success or failure are influencing students' math results. Only when we change the question do we see the variables that can intervene. The question is the key. Once it is identified, all efforts are focused in the right place. Asking the wrong question is like looking for your keys under a street lamp just because it's bright. While the real key lies in a darker place, the fake question gives us a feeling of being busy but never leads to results. Take a look at your own work. You ask how to reduce stress at work. Sounds reasonable but might be the wrong question. The right question might be why is the operating system leaving employees without control over their work, or what in the process is wasting time. Real questions open up directions for action. Asking the right questions is an act of refining your thinking. It forces you to break away from vague assumptions and find the core variable. The right question is like a drill. Concentrate power into one point and from there penetrate through the hard rock. Practice this exercise when you find yourself stuck. Write down the question that is haunting you and sit down. Is this really the original question? What assumption is it implying? If we drop that assumption, another question arises. Usually just 3 rounds of digging will bring you to a completely different question, and that's where you need to aim. The power of defining the real question is not only that it gets you closer to the solution, but also that it saves energy. Instead of shooting arrows randomly, you aim straight at the bull's eye. Instead of wasting your mind on the fake, focus on the real thing. The right questions clarify understanding and draw attention to important features. It is an art that Sokra has practiced all his life, not letting himself and others get carried away by false questions but patiently pursuing the easy route. When talking about the art of asking questions, we cannot separate it from the art of listening to ask the right questions. First of all, you have to listen correctly. But listening here is not just waiting for the other person to finish speaking. Active listening means paying attention to every gap in the response. Every silence, every unspoken assumption. The real questions often lie in those gaps. Stress is a master at this. He did not rush into explaining or imposing conclusions. He just listened. Then from the interlocutor's own words, he asked a question. Those questions are like a mirror forcing the other person to see the contradiction within themselves. Through that process, the truth gradually revealed. Scratch shows that you don't need to be a treasure trove of answers, you just need to be someone who raises the right questions in everyday life. We can practice this with specific exercises. 1. The L question. When you are faced with a problem, try reframing the question instead of asking how to get a higher score. Ask how to understand more deeply, communicate more clearly, and arouse more curiosity. Instead of how to manage your time better, ask what is really a priority. Small changes in the way you ask will open up entirely new courses of action. 2. Traffic situations when stuck in traffic. The question is often how to get out of traffic jams, but you alone cannot solve the infrastructure of the whole city. That question is useless. Change it to, I'll be stuck for 40 minutes. So how to use this time effectively? The new question doesn't eliminate the traffic jam, but turn it into an opportunity. Listen to a podcast, call a loved one, revisit the idea, change the question, change the experience. Third, in studying, instead of asking how to do well on a test, ask how to immerse yourself more deeply in the material. The answer could be to write a detailed outline yourself, present it to a group, or tutor someone else. Redirecting questions helps us turn the learning process into an active experience, not just test preparation. The principle lies here. An improved question is a broadened perspective. Asking questions is like breathing. If you stop asking, thinking suffocates. But if you keep the habit of asking, your mind is always fresh, constantly moving. The answer is only a temporary stop, the question is the air, the breath of thought. And the final point, the person who knows how to question himself is the master of his thinking. When you sit alone, no audience, no teacher, but still ask yourself if you are sure. What if it's wrong? If true, what are the consequences? At that time you built a stress inside not to torture yourself, but to guide the mind. The art of asking is not reserved for the dead. It is a habit that anyone can practice. And when you practice it, you carry a source of air with you, keeping your mind alive, flexible, and alert. Part 4, Water. Seeing the flow of ideas, looking back, looking forward. When people talk about the moment of inspiration, the image often used is of a light bulb going on, a sudden, bright light, flashing out of nowhere. But that image deceives us. Ideas are not born in a vacuum. It was not a sudden flash of lightning that cut across the night sky, but the result of a flow that lasted through time. Planted matter from how many layers before? Think of a piece of music. We hear the last note and it sounds as if it were natural. But it actually only makes sense in relation to the notes that came before it. A single note alone does not constitute anything, but placed in a flow it becomes an inevitable conclusion. Same idea. The flow of ideas is the rule. Every invention, every creation follows from a certain past. Bell did not create telephones from scratch. He stands on the shoulders of previous signaling efforts. Darwin did not write the theory of evolution in one day but crystallized from many observations. The theory argued before him. Rowling did not create Harry Potter from scratch, she inherited the tradition of legendary European adventure stories and children's literature. Steve Jobs did not create the iPhone alone, but he was instrumental in the invention of touch screens, internet connectivity, and mobile phones. We often forget the past of ideas because history is told as if there was a single shining moment. But the truth is that ideas are the result of evolution. Each generation adds a layer and we see the top without seeing the underlying layers. When we understand this, we have a powerful tool. To understand an idea today, look at it as a passage in a stream. Instead of asking what it is, ask how it got here. The simple exercise is silence. Whenever you are faced with a concept or a decision, trace back to what it was like yesterday, what it was like last month, where it came from last year. A subject today is the sum total of the efforts of generations of scientists. A policy today is the result of debates over many years. An individual's habits today are a combination of previous experiences, environment, and education. Take the bicycle for example. It does not appear intact. At first, the carts were heavy wooden carts with only two large wheels, which the driver had to push with his feet. Then came the steel frame pedals, brakes, tracks, each small improvement followed another. That run eventually brought us to the familiar bicycle. If you only look at the car today, you will not see the whole long journey. But looking back, you understand why it has its current shape and you can imagine where it will go next. It is looking backward to understand the present that helps us avoid the illusion that everything is immutable. We realize that what we take for granted today is actually just a version in progress. And if it is a version, then it can be changed, improved, or replaced. As you get into the habit of mindfulness, you begin to see the present as a passing moment, not an eternity. And this awareness opens up possibilities. If yesterday led to today, then today may lead to another tomorrow. Understanding the present through the flow of the past is the first step to mastering the water element of continuity. And when we realize that every idea is in one long river, we will no longer be enchanted by the magic ray but instead know how to follow the water to find the next turn. If thin back helps us see the roots, the next step in the flow of ideas is iteritis. Repeat, edit, improve. An idea rarely comes out perfect the first time. It is like a rough stone, it takes many chisels to reveal its shape. Every writer knows that the first draft is just material. Highway once said that the first draft was always bad, but he wrote it anyway because he understood. Only bad drafts have something to fix. Each time he rereads it, he cuts, adds, and refines it 10, 20 times. The manuscript becomes clean, powerful, the flow transforming the initial awkwardness into a perfect structure. The principle here is clear: create a rough version even if it is substandard and then continuously improve it. If you wait until your idea is perfect, you'll never start. The first version is not for show but to lay the foundation for the next version. Remember the spirit of the file. Failure on purpose is part of the process. Same goes for repeating ideas. You accept the wrongs and the shortcomings. Consider it as raw material for polishing. Each loop is like a small jump. And over many laps, you move all the way. An obvious example is in software engineering, where a product does not come out complete. It starts with buggy testing and then engineers debug it. User feedback. Next update is better. That loop never stops because technology is always advancing. So how to practice? Pick an idea, an article, a design, a plan. Get the first version out as quickly as possible, don't be a perfectionist, then look at it coldly, point out the weak points, fix them, repeat the process. You will find each time you refine your idea brighter, tighter. The first draft is never perfect but is a necessary starting point. It is like the upstream stream is still mixed with sand. But it is needed for the river to flow. Relate to real life when we open a store, make a video, learn a skill. We are often blinded by the fear of not being good enough. But if we never start, the flow will stagnate. Allow yourself to make a draft and the water will find its way, as long as you are willing to iterate and correct. Etiquettes reminds us that progress does not come from one giant leap but from thousands of small steps, and each step requires a first draft. The flow of ideas not only repeats, it expands. Once you have an idea, assume that it can be extended in other directions. Is the principle considered? Expansion is inevitable, not accidental. Take the example of a mobile phone. It started out as a phone call and then it expanded to text messaging, taking pictures, accessing the internet, and became a pocket computer. Each function does not fall from the sky but is a branch growing out of the main God. If you look at any product, any idea, you might ask what else could it become? And there is almost always an answer. The exercises here are simple yet powerful. Pick a familiar idea and force yourself to think of at least 3 ways to expand on it. For example, a book isn't just for reading, it can become a course, a podcast, a discussion club. Forcing yourself to branch out makes you see overlooked potential. Along with expansion comes improvised improvement. Assume that every existing idea contains flaws or shortcomings. The question is not whether something is wrong, but where it is wrong, what is missing, and how it could be better. That assumption opens the way for us. The hardest part is overcoming the bias of what is running. When something is working, we often assume it is okay, enough, but that is what blinds us. Only when we dare to believe that even what is working is not perfect, can we find a better solution. Think of a light bulb. When Edison made the incandescent light bulb, it's a miracle, the whole world is satisfied, but if it stopped there, we wouldn't have fluorescent lights, we wouldn't have LED lights. What's working well doesn't mean it can't be replaced. Innovation is the foundation of creativity. We don't always need a completely new idea. Sometimes just one small tweak, one addition, one small fork is all it takes to change the whole system. Try asking yourself, could what I am using, believing, and doing be better, and more importantly, how could it be better? Don't let complacency blind you. Stand ID and improve X together create flexibility. Open new branches and sharpen old branches. Water does not flow in just one way, it branches, it cleans itself, it finds a better path, and thinking must also expand and improve, never to stop. The flow of ideas is never closed. Under conscient econom. The world is always in a state of construction, no solution, no concept, no standard is permanent. All are just temporary versions, waiting to be edited or replaced. Let's look back at the past. There was a time when smoking was considered a style, a sign of luxury, and advertisements were filled with images of doctors holding cigarettes. Today we look back and find it funny, even infuriating. The question is, what were they thinking? And this question is also a reminder in the present. There are probably things that future generations will look at us and ask the same question. The exercise here is straightforward. Choose a habit, a standard, a point of view that today's society considers normal. Then wonder if our grandchildren will find this laughable, even horrifying. At what point? When you practice thinking like this, you are pulling the present out of the illusion of permanence and seeing it as a piece in the flow. It is this perspective that forces us to never be satisfied. An idea today is just one version in a series. It is scalable. Understanding that, we are both humble and brave. Humble enough to know that you do not possess the final truth, brave enough to contribute to improvement and open new branches. Here water connects all the previous elements. From earth we learn to understand the foundations. From phase, we learn to use mistakes to progress. From A, we learn to create questions to open directions. And with water, we bring it all together in one flow. Know that you are standing on the shoulders of previous ideas. Know that today is just a link in the process, and know that tomorrow there will be a new version. When we see the world as a construction site, we escape the illusion of completion instead of asking if it's okay. I wonder what the next version will be like. Instead of waiting for a magic spark, we work with the flow, looking backward, iterating, expanding, improving, and the key point is that ideas are not the product of a single genius but a bend in a long river. We only contribute to changing direction, adding flow, sharpening the stream, and that does not make the idea any less. On the contrary, it gives us freedom. We don't need the burden of creating from nothing. Just dare to join the flow, remember the world is never done. And that is good news. Because when the world is always under construction, we always have the opportunity to continue building. The fifth, the quintessential element, embraces change, transforming oneself. We are often advised to try harder, to do better. But sometimes trying is better, like adding another piece of cloth to a fishing boat. You can patch it many times, no matter how skillfully, but the boat will still have a hole. What is needed is not another patch but another boat. In thinking, instead of asking how to be better, ask how to be different. The difference lies in strategy. When you are stuck on a problem, sometimes trying harder and pushing yourself harder doesn't get you anywhere. You are pushing on an already flawed framework. Liberation comes when you change the frame completely. Change approach, change tools, change perspective, change strategy to be stronger and increase force. Imagine a piano group. A beginner often thinks he has to practice more, remember notes faster, move his fingers faster. That is the mindset of doing better. But a mature artist doesn't just play faster, they play differently. They no longer have to memorize each note but feel the structure of the music. They don't look at individual keys but see the whole chord sequence. The difference is not in muscle speed but in the way of thinking about the task. This is the principle of expert chance. Please describe in detail. What are good people doing differently than me? When you look closely enough, you realize they not only have more skills, but are on a different operating system. Beginners play each note, experts look at the big picture, beginners memorize the surface. Good people understand structure. Applying this principle forces you to move from an obsession with doing more to doing differently. When you see good people not struggling like you but more easily, it is because they have changed their frame. What you need is not more strength but a change of approach. Try to put yourself in whatever field you are studying. Observe someone better than you. Instead of just admiring, ask what they are doing differently. Are they using tools that I'm not using? Are they focusing on features that I'm overlooking? Are they asking different questions than me? Once you describe that difference, you have the key to change, not to copy the whole thing, but to learn how to move into the new framework. Changing the operating system for thinking is the essence of this fifth element. The central question is no longer whether I am trying hard enough, but whether I am following the right framework. Because if the frame is wrong, all efforts will only tire us. But if done wrong, a small change can release huge amounts of energy. The first message of this element is therefore very clear. Do it differently, not just better. When we look closely at the difference between novice and expert, we begin to see the power of expert change. Newbies struggle with every little move. Good people seem to be easy, comfortable, even effortless. But they don't actually do less work. They are doing completely different things. Let's go back to the image of the pianist. The beginner tensed his fingers, staring at the keys. Memorize note sequences as a series of discrete symbols. They tried to press faster, practiced for more hours, but no matter how hard they tried, the music remained clumsy. The mature artist does another job. They understand the structure of music. Know which chords lead to which chords. Hear the flow of the melody. When they need to jump long distances between keys, they don't guess the key but visualize the position in space. The difference is in the mindset, not in the level of training. This principle is not only true in music, but also in mathematics. A new student often tries to memorize formulas and apply them by rote. Good students do not stop at the formula but understand why the formula exists. Understand the relationship between concepts. They don't need to memorize too much because they have a good grasp of the original structure in sports. New basketball players focus on each shot, each movement. Good players don't just look at the ball, they look at the whole field. Predict the movements of teammates and opponents. They don't try to get better at one move but switch to a completely different task that controls the flow of the game. Expert Chan forces us to realize that when learning, don't just increase the amount of effort within the same framework. Look at the good people and describe specifically what they are doing differently and ask if you can start adopting some of that difference. This is the shift from doing more difficult to doing differently. It's like changing the operating system for your computer. You can add more chip upgrades, but if the software is outdated, the performance will still be poor. Changing to a new operating system really unleashes power. This is also a way to break down the seemingly limiting wall. Many people say to themselves, "I have no talent." But talent only determines the starting point. The destination depends on the mindset you choose. If you are in the wrong frame, talent is wasted. If you shift to the right frame, even a small jump makes a breakthrough. Simple exercise: choose a field you are studying or working in. Write down a list of what people better than you are doing differently. It doesn't need to be much, just one or two differences will do. Pick one to try. Let that difference be the seed of change. Changing the frame is not a one-day job, but it starts with a question of who is better than me. And from there you stop obsessing about doing more and start the journey of doing something different. Many people believe that innate ability is destiny. Some people are born good at math, some people are born with an ear for music, and I am not. That view is both dangerous and wrong. It's true that limits exist, but the gap between potential and actual achievement is staggeringly large and is largely determined by mindset, not genetics. I have met students who are considered bad. They failed many times, were criticized, and lost confidence. They are labeled as untalented. But what I saw was different. Those students were never given the opportunity to change their approach. They just keep tinkering within the same framework instead of learning to do things differently. As they begin to practice the 4 elements, understanding deeply, learning from mistakes, asking questions, and going with the flow, transformation gradually occurs. It is here that the 5th element becomes important: page, proactive change. It does not come by chance but by conscious choice. When we stick with those 4 elements long enough, we don't just solve a problem or do a project better, we change ourselves. New abilities are not a product of luck but a result of habit. Let's consider a concrete example. In a math class there are students who learn very quickly and memorize formulas instantly. Others learn more slowly and struggle step by step. Who will succeed in the long run? Intuition tells me that I learn quickly. But the reality is often the opposite. Fast learners sometimes just skim the surface, slow learners. If you know how to take advantage of mistakes, ask questions, and go back to the foundation, you will build a more solid understanding. Speed does not mean efficiency. This is what the book wants to emphasize that you can do. Innate differences, when placed next to the right habits, become pale. Quick-witted people are not always the most creative and effective. It is the habit of going deep, daring to make mistakes, knowing how to ask questions, going with the flow and finally daring to change that determines who goes far. We often underestimate the power of habit. But let's look back. Every step forward of humanity comes not only from inborn geniuses but from millions of people who persistently changed their thinking, their ways of doing, and their frameworks. It's not just about changing strength, that's where the real difference comes from. So when you say to yourself, "I can't," please fix it. I haven't changed the approach yet, as you just need to switch frames. The distance between you and success has shortened. The 5th element does not promise that all limits disappear. It just goes to show that true limits are rarely innate. Often it lies in the mindset that we have not changed. There is a story that I often repeat. A friend decided to change his lifestyle. At first, he jumped in with an iron will, forcing himself to diet, exercise intensely, and give up all his old habits. As a result, after a few weeks, he was exhausted and gave up. But next time he chose a different way. Instead of forcing himself, he gradually changed, replacing greasy dinners with lighter meals, and adding the habit of taking short walks every morning. After a few months, Lai no longer felt forced, change became a part of life, no longer a temporary campaign. It is a reflection of what we are talking about when the four elements of earth, fire, air, and water are incorporated into our daily routine. They are no longer discrete techniques but become intellectual identities. Not only do you become better at solving a problem, you become a more learnable, creative, and adaptable person. This is the deep meaning of transform yourself. Change is not an instant achievement but a process of making effective thinking a living default. It's like Lai no longer forces himself to diet but simply eats healthy because that's his new identity. Once you assimilate the four elements into your life, the consequences don't stop at work or studies. It extends to your self-definition. You become clearer about your values, beliefs, ethics. Effective thinking not only solves problems but also answers the question of who I am. Like Descartes once said, I think therefore I am here. Effective thinking training gets you to where I change so I continue to evolve. Then you are not only an individual but also an ideal citizen of the community. A turbulent world needs calm voices. Know how to look long-term, know how to ask the right questions. Dare to try and fail, know the foundation, and know that every idea is just a version in a stream. By living by these principles, you contribute to creating an impact beyond yourself, from your family, community to the global scale. And there is a truth that ends this section: always under construction. It is never complete, there is no final solution, no eternal idea, everything is subject to change. We are constantly improving, and that is why you and I are always works in progress. The first four elements teach us to dive deep, learn from mistakes, question constantly, and go with the flow. The fifth element reminds us, let it all become a habit, let the transformation happen naturally, so that you are not only better but different. You don't have to force yourself to change forever. Just by living by these principles, you will naturally become the evolving version of yourself. And in a world that is always half-roasted. Living like a work in progress is the most fulfilling way to live. Thank you for being patient with me through this book journey. If we started with a few loose stones in the introduction, by now you should have seen the whole structure. An edifice of thought is built from insights, mistakes, questions, and streams of ideas. And above all, change. I believe that listening or reading a book is not the end but only the beginning. The true value is not in the closed page, but in how it moves you. Force you to look at yourself, force you to try to live and think differently. If along the way there is an idea that makes you pause and think, then this book has fulfilled its mission. I look forward to hearing your reviews of the book, not for easy consensus but for feedback. Whether you agree or disagree is a continuation of the dialogue. Each of your comments is a mirror for me and the community to see more clearly what needs to be clarified. And more than that, I'd like to invite you to suggest the next book you'd like to hear. The world of knowledge is larger than any single path. Your suggestion may open a new path that leads us to uncharted realms of thought. And now Book Essence says goodbye and